to literature and my fascination with literature. I was just a compulsive reader, you know, at age 14 or 15, and I had the feeling that when real life started, when I started reading, that the in some strange way these mostly fictitious characters in literature seemed more real to me than people encountered in real life. Now, maybe that has to do with the specific character of that was mostly 19th century and then early 20th century. When I say early, I mean like Hemingway and Faulkner among the Americans. That this was a certain type of literature mostly informed by life lived, by personal experience, and then transformed into literature. And I very early on I started wondering, you know, why can't I wait to get home to sit down in this old armchair and to read, to continue reading this book when so much is going on outside. And what is this mysterious energy compelling me to turn the pages? You know, where does it come from? It is not to know who did it, you know, like it's not the Agatha Christie type of thing. Is it in the, just to, how did they gozar, you know, just to enjoy the language, the way the line is written, to see what next line he will put to it. So that was certainly a part of it. But then there were, of course, emotions of the characters that were all of a sudden you feel either, I know exactly what he feels because I felt that before, or else this is very weird, how come he's feeling this, say Raskolnikov in Dostoevsky or so. I mean, I just didn't see myself ever taking an axe and hitting it over an old woman's head or so to fight an enemy, maybe. But I mean, and of course there were also the type of novels where you really wanted to know not so much who did it, but how will this action ever go on. And at first it was probably the tales of an individual coming of age, the classic thing, which is Young Turles, which is in some other movies. But soon this kind of very self-centered experience was of less interest to me than what Gunter Grass once told me he would label an epic novel, which means, according to him, and I don't know about philosophy and aesthetics and humanities in general, that an epic novel is where you have characters in a small town, normal surrounding, living their ordinary lives, and all of a sudden an event from the outside comes in and throws them off, like a war, a natural catastrophe. In the Lohmann family, the fact that he can't pay the last installment on his house and will lose it, or this type of all of a sudden an event, either totally from the outside or partly related to their lives, throws them off. And he says, now it's getting interesting, because now each character has to react in his own way. Now he will reveal his character in a sense. He may even only then find his character, as I only found my different identities through these travels and countries and experiences I was exposed to. And ever since that, I realized, well, what I was really interested in was this type of epic experience, where it does not come from your innermost conflicts or so, but that is, you have a so-called normal person who either becomes a hero, a villain, or an outstanding person, or a failure and a loser, because the way he reacts to outside events that all of a sudden throw him off a path. But that is kind of a very seen from the outside. There still must be another reason why one would like to read. I mean, it is not only curiosity. As I always say, there must be some energy in the book. During my life, I came to the point to realize that, well, when the writer wrote the book, or the painter painted the painting, or the composer composed his piece, or even the filmmaker made his movie, he or a whole crew around him worked very hard to get this piece done. And the work is not like chopping woods, it's psychic work. It's what you might call artistic or creativity. And you know that, say you have to write a piece, or I have to work on a screenplay with a writer. After a day's work, one is completely exhausted, even more exhausted than if you were cutting wood, and yet all you did was sitting at a table, holding a pen. Since I only still work in this old-fashioned way, or you would be typing. So it consumes a lot of energy because you're exhausted afterwards. So this creative energy can't be lost. It went somewhere. I mean, we all know from physics about the conservation of energy. Say if someone walks down a street and a tile falls from a roof and hits him on the head, there's two reasons. One is gravitation, because of the earth magnetism. But the other is that in this tile on the roof, a lot of energy was stored. What energy, you might ask? Well, a mason someday, maybe 105 years ago, took this stone from the street to carry it up to the roof, which cost him a lot of energy, or some energy. This energy is now being preserved in the stone up there, and the day it falls, the energy is released. That's physics, basically. Probably the first lecture in physics. And I say, well, maybe there is such a thing as psychic energy. And if the painter worked so long, say Vermeer, on this painting with a little wall, a yellow wall underneath the window of this women's house in Delft, 300 years later, when we walk by this painting and stop and say, what is this little wall? And we start looking at it. It's because of the psychic energy he put in there, and which is now released and comes back to us and touches us. I mean, I'm not an esoteric or so, But I came to believe very strongly that in all work, artistic work, probably in other work too, there is such an exchange of energy. Now, you may say somebody worked just as hard as Vermeer on a painting and nobody stops in front of it and looks at it. So there might be different types of psychic energy, what we call talent or this or that. But it may also be that we are receptive to one kind of energy and not to this other kind, because it happened so that somebody worked very hard on a piece and nobody is interested in, everybody walks by it, and 200 years later somebody discovers it, has another way of looking at it, tells the people around it who tell it to other people, and all of a sudden this becomes an absolute masterpiece, fetching millions on the art market, and it was ignored for decades. So does it mean that the psychic energy in there was hidden, the creativity invested in it, and it needed a, like in photography, a special developing thing in our brain that all of a sudden we would respond to it and not understand how come other people walked by and discarded it and never saw it decades before? Mysteries. I love these mysteries. And funny enough, come back to my relationship to literature, I was mostly interested in how that, as a reader, in how that happened in literature. But I did not manage to, or I didn't insist enough to write myself, because the next thing, if you're so fascinated by something, why don't you write? At least, I started doing it, and I thought I had no talent for it. It looked boring to me. But then there was another point, is I did not resent to be alone while I was reading. Actually, I was looking for solitude to concentrate and focus on the book, and never felt lonely. Whereas when I was in front of a piece of paper, I felt extremely lonely, desperately lost, and all of a sudden there I had the feeling, what's happening outside? Life is, in front of the window. Why am I sitting here? And I'm not out there partaking in life. And I told Gunter Grass, the writer of the Tin Drum, that this is why I would never have the patience to write a book. And he looked at me and he said, well, what do you think I feel like when I'm writing? It is exactly the same. But this is my trait, so I sit down, I force myself. Actually, he doesn't sit down, he's writing standing up, because he said it's kind of, the writing is not so lazy when you do it standing up. Probably good for your back too. But then at this school where we did some theater and more or less seriously, even in a very dilettante way, I found that I could almost do have the same enjoyment in whatever. I hate even to call it creativity. Anyhow, to do something, but doing it with a group of people, doing it with those amateur actors, schoolboys, and amateur director, Jesuit priest. Oh, by the way, he was like all professional directors. He'd be sitting in a chair in what was supposed to be the audience while we were doing some Molière or Ionesco upstage, and all of a sudden he would jump up, from his chair and jump on the stage, as directors love doing, to show us how to play the scene, insulting us that we didn't understand anything about love or passion or whatnot. Now playing Romeo and Juliet for us, totally unaware of how funny that looked in his black robe. But certainly there was a high degree of enjoyment there, something where, and it continued in a sense when we at our local film club were showing first silent movies, say Dreyer's Joan of Arc, and we see this woman in close-up and silent, and her hair being shoved off, and there is the same psychic energy. You feel something incredible is going on there, and yet all you see is a close-up of a not too attractive woman being her hair cut off. So what is it? Last week in Paris they reshowed an old Godard movie, a beautiful black and white print, Vivre sa vie, where actually Anna Katarina goes into a movie theater to watch this scene, and she's watching exactly this scene, which had to be also for me 10 years earlier at this boarding school, kind of a revelation. And so whether in literature, in Vermeer's painting, in Godard's, or in Dreyer's movie, you experience the same thing, which is, I find very hard to explain, but you feel you better take this seriously. And that's what this priest told me, when he felt whatever passion I might have when I'm talking about movies. And when he was talking about Joan of Arc, he was talking about her love for God, which was so strong that she could easily, be burned because she was carried on by a higher force, which was love. And as he said, he, as a priest, never experienced that, but we, the boys and future grown-ups, would experience someday. And he said, well, if you are so interested in theater or films, that's what you should do as a profession. I was destined to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, an honorable profession in the eyes of my father. And that's why he sent me to a boarding school to prep myself for that. And so the influence these priests had on me was not through a religion. It was actually through their respect for where you could consider art and an artistic profession just on the same level as any other so-called bourgeois career in whatever. So that was the step which encouraged me to not go to law school except as an alibi to get my money, but to now you have this goal. I would like to go into this, but first of all, you don't really know how to go about it. Where can I learn this? But secondly, you have no idea whether you will ever be any good at it. So the question whether you have talent or not, there is no meter to measure that at any age. So it's only after the fact that I realized that there was something daring about that. At the time, it just seemed to me the fun thing to do. That fun and priests and film should all mingle was a wonderful experience, and helped me to discard a lot of preconceived ideas about these different worlds. And one of the films I'll show this ninth day will deal with that. The other question, however, is, okay, I considered this is going to be a profession, and I always said I want to be an artisan. I had high esteem in the village where I grew up for the local carpenter. When I went to his shop and saw him doing a chair, or a table, something that would hold up and be solid. I mean, it was not even Shaker art or so. It was just a regular table and a regular chair. And I thought, well, if I ever become a filmmaker, I would like to approach it as this type of a trade. I did not feel to be an artistic person in myself. I mean, it never had a lot of fantasy and all these things, but I thought you could learn film as a trade. And indeed, I learned it in the two ways: go to school, film schools. There was only one, and it was a bit theoretical. The other was learning, not so much learning by doing, but learning by being like in medieval times or whatever, an artisan works next to a master and watches how he's doing it. Mike Nichols once said, directing is a mysterious thing. It's like lovemaking, you never know how others do it. I told him, Mike, I know how others do it because I assisted 3 directors over a number of pictures. I think 5 with Louis Malle, 3 with Melville, and 1.5 with Alain Resnais. They were very different characters, and I know how they did it. And by the way, the different ways they did it was maybe the main thing I learned from that. One of them, Louis Malle, came to the set obviously to seduce not only the actress and the main actress, but the entire crew. Not for, I would say, narcissistic reasons. I think any filmmaker, now we stick to filmmaking, it's probably true for other artists too, wants to be loved, wants to be liked, whatever, meaning he wants to seduce the possible future audience. So in order to seduce them, he starts by seducing the crew he's working with. He is seducing them in the sense that they all work on the same picture, that they forget about their personal reasons of being there, to draw them into, look what we are doing here. So often actually when Louis Malle appeared and with a scarf, charming and youthful, and his cashmere sweaters and whatnot, was a bit of, not a dandy, but I mean just very pleasantly dressed and perfectly aware of the effect this could have with others. It was like, okay, so what do we do today? It's not, guys, I have an idea, I want to do this and that today, and you all help me. No, it's, what do we do today? It's already to englobe, everybody in it. I'll never forget one day we had a shooting underneath the Eiffel Tower, and it's kind of a zany Helse-Poppen story, the Zazie in the metro. It's a 11-year-old girl who comes from the province to Paris, is being picked up by her uncle at the railway station, and her only reason of coming to Paris is to see the metro, the underground, and that day it's on strike. So she is just running around the city looking for a working metro and meeting all kind of strange people. Anyhow, among others, climbing up the Eiffel Tower. So as we set up for the shot and assemble there, and he comes in with his little Renault Dauphine car, does a little power sliding before stopping the car. The cars were very important in the 50s and 60s. Still a symbol of freedom and all kind of things. Didn't care about energy or pollution. And a very candid relationship. Jumps out of the car, says, "So, what do we do today?" And at that moment notices there's a slight drizzle, actually red. And before anybody understands what's going on, he said, "Get a rope off this space here, and we'll call it the space of the unknown suicidal." Somebody had just jumped up from the tower, and all that came to the ground was this little drizzle. I watched this guy doing, and for me, it was ease and grace incarnate. It was wit. It was sensibility, and that is one way of directing, of seducing your crew, of trying out with your actors. When you come to a moment where the scene somehow doesn't work, you start blocking the scene with the actors, and they give their lines, and you do a first rehearsal, and you feel, oh, it's painful, it's not very exciting, it feels dead, it's dreadful. Instead of saying, try harder, he would say, how about doing it differently? So change positions, maybe even change parts, change the whole approach. Do it differently. I could go on with some examples of him, but you could just see this type of temperament. Now, as opposed to that, Jean-Pierre Melville, who made these film noir, Doulos, the Samurai, which I both assisted him in, and others, kind of stylized gangster movies, as we called it. He was like a very solemnal figure, always in a black, dark coat, always with his head on, dark glasses, hardly talking to the actors except just to see that the hat was sitting right on their heads, or that the collar was up. He stylized himself into like a mafia godfather in his way of directing actors. Actually, it started with the casting. When we had a casting to do, there was the door where the actors would enter. He lived in a small little movie studio, which used to be a garage, and he transformed into a movie studio. So he actually lived in the studio where he was working. He had his bedroom upstairs and a spiral staircase going from his bedroom down to the studio. So if this was the setup, the studio had no windows anyhow. He would put up two lights there, directing towards the door. Between the two lights, the table, him sitting behind the table, Now the actor who was, coming in for a casting had to walk, in diagonal across the studio with these lights on him, almost like in a bad cop movie, I'm innocent. And he would just be sitting there, a silhouette with his head, Well, most actors don't even made it halfway through the room, and they were already, lost their confidence or tried to do a joke or whatnot. Well, that was for him the thing. Some made it absolutely straight and entering, into this type of power game, like almost looking at each other and to see, who will flinch first. That was his way of testing actors and, in a sense, of directing. Only once Gian-Maria Volonté kind of destroyed his game, because he came in, made 2 steps, looked around, understood the whole thing, and said goodbye, turned around and left. Now Melville had to run after him because he needed this actor to get him on the billboard to finance his movies. But no more different in temperament than Louis Malle and him, and that goes, as I said, for the on the set. His whole aim, he was always sitting in a chair, never moved around, was sitting there, telling the director of photography to kill this light and bring another one and do this and do that. The actors, one step to the right, do this line again. No, don't race. Well, a little faster, yeah. Just very physical. Why don't you go, take the gun on whatever the third word of this line, So no, I said on the third word, not on the second word. This kind of directing, totally different from the other who would say, well, let's try it differently. Let's, how do you feel at ease? Both bringing in very good results. Maybe different kind of pictures, maybe not all that different in the sense that their quality was always in the humanity of the performance, but the ways to obtain it were totally different. People would almost not whisper or murmur on Melville's set, where that he might, I never saw him in a rage, but he exuded such, mafia-like, Godfather-like power or so that everybody conformed to it. And Belmondo and Alain Delon, who were the actors on the 2 films I did with him, usually very misbehaving, and very with allures and diva-like attitudes or so, were sheerly intimidated by the sheer, self-assurance this man seemed to exude. Now, he was a totally self-made man. Jean-Pierre Melville was born Jean-Pierre Grünbach, a shirt maker in Alsace, in Mulhouse, same city where William Wyler came from. He was very proud about that. He'd never been to a film school. He had never worked on somebody else's movie. He just bought this garage after war with money he'd earned elsewhere. They shot their first movie with pieces of film that were left over from other movies, little pieces for 30 seconds, for a minute or so. Totally self-taught, autodidact, called himself Melville. I'm not sure he'd ever read a novel of him, Melville, but it sounded good to him. But he was so strong believing that films was made according to certain rules, as he had seen in films of William Wyler or who else? Robert Wise. These were his gods, and that you could not question it. he seemed to have a very strong and very personal vision of what the film should be. His sets were extremely minimal, most of the time, almost like in a soap opera, just 2, at maximum 3 walls set, Actually, since he built the sets himself in his own studio, he had a number of elements, one element with a door, one element with a window, some just straight elements. And when he was working on a screenplay upstairs, he had me and some other assistant worked with him, was more like a handyman, go down, set up these 2 walls, and then he tried out the scene he was writing. And when he realized, well, for some movement of the camera or where the actors would be standing as against Alain Delon, he'd need a 3rd wall. Finally he said, we'll have this 3rd wall. Then he went back to writing. Actually, writing, he was also adapting mostly novels for film, but not as I foolishly, high literature. No, he took, série noire, film noir novels, mostly French writers. And the way of writing the screenplay was we had to go out and buy 2 copies of the book because he needed the front side and the reverse side. So then he underlined the scenes, the lines he wanted to keep of mostly dialogue and stuff. I had to sit down and cut it out, glue it on a piece of paper, and then on the 2nd copy of the book he took the back side and did the same work. And then I brought that stuff to the secretary, and the secretary typed it, putting in interior day or night or whatever. He added then on this a few indications, what you may call action and so, and she typed those again. And then at the end of the week we'd bring this pack of whatever, 20 or 30 pages to the producer to prove that Jean-Pierre was working on a screenplay. I hardly exaggerate. It sounds like a good story, and I swear to God, this is the way I've seen the Doulos doing one of his films. But I had a falling out on him with this because it was all very exciting. But then there came a point in the novel, the detective novel, which was not very good, where everything that had seemed so mysterious and to try to understand the character was explained. There was a scene where the 2 guys, the indicator who worked for the police and the gangster, had to sit down and had to explain to each other what had all happened, which they knew and the reader did not know. And I say to Jean-Pierre, you can't do that. I mean, maybe they can do this in the book, but we have to show in the screenplay. I was very familiar with him after. I mean, we had a very good relationship until this point. And so, no, he said, you don't understand this, this. And I know, Hitchcock says the audience has to be better informed than the characters. In the movie, I don't agree with that. The Hitchcock thing is there's 2 characters and they don't know that under the bench they're sitting on is a bomb, but the audience knows it, so that's suspense. He says, no, I don't like that. I see 2 characters on a bench and they feel very uncomfortable, and I try to understand why do they behave in such a strange way, because I, audience, don't know that there's a bomb, but they know there's a bomb. Again, very interested in very different approach. years later, I taught a bit like here in a class in Sundance, and a young guy, one of the students, came to me very excited and said, "Oh, you worked with Melville on the Doulos." I said, yes. And we talked about it, and oh, my favorite movie. I said, no, it's, I worked on others with Melville I like much better. The Doulos has this failure that, you know, what I just told you. He said, well, that's what's just so great about this movie. It's the only detective movie where for 70 minutes you just can't get it. What is going on? And I said, yeah, but how boring that then all of a sudden it has to explain what you didn't know. He said, yeah, but that doesn't matter. That still makes the first 70 minutes the greatest. His name was Quentin Tarantino, and he was there, and he was rehearsing to make, and we shot scenes with him for Reservoir Dogs, and I sent him a screenplay, which I still had at home. I made a photocopy of the Doulos.
Nice.
So this is again how differently you can approach things. And the third character now is Alain Resnais now, who only worked on last year in Marienbad and one more. And his attitude to this was, you know, this famous, the kind of art house film Incarnate, where there is no story, or you cannot on purpose, I mean, it's written that way, that you cannot really make up the story. You cannot know what happened. You don't know whether this man is telling a story to this lady in this magnificent castle hotel to seduce her, or whether actually the year before, last year in Marienbad, they had an affair. And when, you know, we were all very excited, and Alain Resnais agreed that this was a very daring enterprise, because there was no way to know how the audience would react to it. And he said, not only that, but I consider it an experiment because I have no idea what this movie will be. And he said, and I said, yeah, but then how can you do it? He said, well, in order to find out what kind of an object such a film will be. So it is not at all that he had, like Melville, the whole movie in his mind before he even shot it, and whether he needed a reverse shot and a third angle and another wall there to do it. Resnais was doing this Marienbad, really following exactly the script Robbe-Grillet, this novelist, French novelist, had imagined, with no idea whether it will work or not, but with the idea, let's find out what kind of an object that will be. And it turned out to be an object which some people thought was magnificent, others was totally boring, was certainly incomprehensible to many, was, as usual, just ahead of its time, because we made a screening 50 years after it was made in last fall, and first of all, it wasn't boring at all, and it didn't even feel that incomprehensible. It is just that in the meantime, storytelling in filmmaking from 61 to 11 had departed from the kind of 5-act screenplay with the conflict and resolve and an error, and in the third act the character has a choice between the good and the bad and ultimately redeems himself and blah blah blah. This formula, which till then had dominated all of filmmaking, whether in Europe or in the United States, at least so in the Western Eurocentric world, all of a sudden was totally different. And today, as cinema and storytelling and the whole way of looking at an audiovisual thing has changed, it's still a beautiful picture to look at, but you wouldn't really call it avant-garde. Actually, it rather feels a bit old-fashioned. And it certainly works in the sense that it has a fascination on its own, and fascination needs not come that you have the most original story of all times with the best cliffhangers. It could just come from the style, from what I said when you read Proust. Also, you're fascinated by other things, but by the question. So what happens next? Back to the beginning, having worked with these three directors already, they're very, very different approach to filmmaking, yet almost, more or less the same generation, certainly in the same country in France, and during the same few years of the so-called French Nouvelle Vague. Just already was a good lecture that there is not one way of doing. There is everybody has to find his own way of doing. But what they all did is they, in one way or the other, tricked the cast and, what's more important, the entire crew into working on the same picture. The one was seducing them, the other one, with his gangster ways, was terrorizing them. Alain Resnais giving all of us the feeling we were in a chapel, we were doing sacred work, we were in an artistic experiment, and there was some, it was just like such a privilege to be there and to partake in it that you're hardly there to breathe. Not my kind of set, needless to say, but unquestionably there was a great belief in everybody on the set, and as, by the way, during these days in filmmaking, that first of all there could be nothing more important in the world than filmmaking. Secondly, that we were reinventing it entirely, so everything that had been before us could forget about. This was all new, and there was it was like a feeling of a brotherhood, of belonging to that. Of course, these directors would have very different ways if there was a conflict, and there are often conflicts on the set with actors, because we're all dealing. Filmmaking is about emotions, so we're dealing all day long with emotions, and we better have some ourselves, and so emotional conflicts are inevitable. It's not, if there weren't these conflicts, and now this actor behaving like a diva, or this one is pissed, or here is this, or here's that. No, that's the way it should be. That is nothing exceptional. There's tension, there's conflict, there may be fun, but it is never ordinary. If you put such a certain amount of racehorses together, there is nervosity in the air, and this is the way it has to be. So already there's nothing to be scared about. You should be scared if there's harmony on the set. Everybody loves each other and everything. What a boring piece of work is that going to be ultimately? Maybe. Sometimes I just had a very good experience, so I'm afraid it'll be a terrible movie. I will only know that a week after next when I look at the first editing. Generally, conflicts can be productive, and there's different ways of addressing them. Of course, the the usual thing, especially in I would say now in Hollywood, but maybe I should just say in America, is that it becomes a power game between egos. Well, that's a bit the Western situation. You know, at the end you have two guys, and the conflict has been escalating, and then there's a shootout, and there will be a survivor, a winner, and a dead one. That is, of course, makes very good and energetic movies. If you have a society, say like a late European society, where you try to de-escalate every conflict and try to always find, by consensus solutions how to get along, this will be a society very pleasant to live in, but won't create a lot of drama to tell in terms of movies or plays. Dealing with conflicts is, as I observed it with other directors, and I'll tell you one story how I did, but one never knows about oneself. Some just ignore it, let them fight it out. I don't want to be the father to this company. That's the Billy Wilder attitude. And I say, well, what about, if somebody, one of the actors comes to find you and solicitates your advice, or, is kind of confessing his problems. He said, I don't encourage such behavior. I make a joke, I walk around, I disappear. I'm not anybody's father on the set. And if, let's say, Some Like It Hot, Marilyn Monroe has a problem, well, I'm not here, I'm not been hired as a nurse, I'm not paid as her doctor either. I'm the director, she is a performer. I can give her indications as to how to perform. The rest of her life, I'm not interested in. I'm not even supposed to know. Sounds very cynical, is probably very protective for himself. May work that the actors then work it out among themselves and come up with a solution without being guided. Can totally backfire, as it did in the case of Some Like It Hot, even though she gave a great performance. But when she was always late and couldn't remember her lines and broke down in tears, all of which you don't see in the movie. Well, there was a reason, because having worked with Arthur Miller, I got the other side of who was married to her then, got the tale from the other side. Well, she was pregnant and she lost the child during the making of Some Like It Hot. And Billy Wilder would say, well, why didn't she say so? Conflicts, human beings, emotions. So how do you go about with these conflicts when all of a sudden the actors kind of refuse to work with each other? I only had this once in this Swan in Love. We saw the clip with there was Jeremy Irons, and as the Swan, the seducing man of world, everybody loved and fell for this lady who was not maybe not worthy of him. Anyhow, he totally fell for her and sacrificed everything for her until he found out that she was not really his type, as it said in one of the last scenes. And as opposed to him, there was a third character, a Le Baron de Charlus, a homosexual aristocrat of highest French lineage, totally cynical and whatever, performed by, strange enough, by Alain Delon, where you would expect kind of a heavy-set nobleman. Alain Delon had worked on different projects to make a movie out of Proust's Time Lost with Visconti and with Joe Losey, which were never done. So when he heard of our project, which was just Swan in Love, and there were just one day in the life of Swan in Love, so a very limited approach, he could not figure that a Marcel Proust movie would be made without Alain Delon, and who forced himself upon the French producer Gaumont. They have all kind of the monopoly of major productions in France, who were delighted to have Alain Delon in the cast. I said, but he's all wrong. He said, never worry, don't worry, we need him. And so he was in the movie. But and I got along with him, knowing him from having worked with Melville. But why he soon became aware that he was in the picture, but he was in the wrong part. He was kind of this, partly ridiculous elder homosexual running after the chasing boys in the garden of the Tuileries, and so. Whereas Jeremy Irons was there with beautiful Ornella Muti. So one day I come, having finished shooting, I come back to the set because I forgot my backpack with my screenplay and stuff. And what do I see? Alain Delon with Ornella Muti, fully dressed in the costumes of the film, made up and all, set in the rose garden and taking photographs. I say, what is this? Oh, Alain says, just for the family album. I say, come on. Parole de scout, my word as Boy Scout. Okay. I leave, of course, a week later, these pictures on front page of all glossy French People magazines and so on. Which could be great publicity for the film, except every cultivated French person knows that the Baron de Charlus is homosexual and not having an affair, yet tender love scenes with Ornella Muti. So it cast a very bad light on the movie as such, and therefore Alain Delon, like a scorpion, was kind of, sticking his poison into the very ship we were all navigating on, but he couldn't help it. He wanted to be front page. So I insisted, and I said, well, Jeremy Irons was totally pissed, of course, and I had to take his sides because he was right. I mean, this was his part and not Alain Delon's part. But that was minor in my eyes than the effect it would have upon the reception of the movie, which all of a sudden this movie became a scandal before even being finished. Look at this German director, doesn't even know that Charlus is a homosexual, has had love affairs with Ornella Muti and whatnot. And so I asked the producers, all this happening within 24 hours, basically. And I said, we need immediately by tomorrow a declaration by Alain Delon that these pictures were not part of the movie, that these were private shots of him and Ornella Muti and meant for the family album, and somehow unfortunately came to the press. And that he regretted and blah, blah, blah. He refused to do that. So I said, well, then I'm not going to shoot with him anymore. They said, sir, you got a deal here. It's signed. You better show up tomorrow morning on the set. So I said, okay, I'll show up, but I won't talk to him. So we went on shooting for 2 weeks. He was there. Whenever I have anything to say to him, I wrote it on a piece of paper. The assistant brought it to him. He came back right or okay, or I don't agree, and then another piece of paper went back and forth. How silly, how childish. But sometimes you have to go through this thing, poker face, because everything depends on it. So even with being a nice guy, you cannot avoid conflicts. And then you understand better sometimes Billy Wilder's attitude. Early on in this picture, where the rivalry between these two leading men, Alain Delon and Jeremy Irons, both in their prime, had not only big egos, but a lot of vanity. Now, vanity with women is no problem. Actually, most of them, they don't have any. The most beautiful, whether it's Ornella Muti or whomever I've worked with, Delphine Serrig and others, the most beautiful woman would look in a mirror and say, oh, ghastly, horrible. She'd only see all the faults in her face and wherever. A man halfway as good looking would stay for hours in front of a mirror, so beautiful, admiring himself. Now, I had 2 of these actors, both of them admiring each other. And you had good Ornella Muti, just lovely, beautiful, and uncomplicated, as women are. And I come at lunch break into the tent where the catering is, and directors are always late coming to lunch, because when you finish shooting, it's a break, you still hang on with the DP and the assistant to see what are we going to do after lunch. So by the time you get to lunch, everybody else is almost finished. Anyhow, settle down, and I see one table Alain Delon, other table Jeremy Irons, back there Ornella. I enter. Now, not that my person is that important, but I happen to be the director. So every one of them is kind of looking, out of the kid's eyes, and I understand, whether they did it on purpose or not. Certainly they are not sitting together. That's on purpose already, and it's not a good sign. But if I sit with Alain, Jeremy will be pissed and wondering what are they talking about, and this and that. So I turned around and asked for a sandwich to be brought in a corner in the park, and was enjoying half an hour of quietness. And ever since that day, that's what I do at lunch break. I don't lunch with the team. I hold it with Billy Wilder. I'd rather be quiet. I can think about what I'm doing in the afternoon, and I don't have to think about whom I am sitting with, and not listening to anybody's claims on his part and the motivations and so on. It makes life easier. And right now, I feel like a coffee, because this was all improvised and not part of our session. But as I felt, the different interests you have and the big different places you're coming from, I think it's the best I can do for you is, just press myself as the piece of fruit Dustin Hoffman was talking about, and talk about those things, and then you will find out how to apply that to your own work. So see you later. So I got a few more stories to tell. Back to the show. what it all comes down to, these observations about filmmaking, is of course the question, well, what exactly is a director supposed to do, or what is he doing? And as I said, the most important thing is to unite the crew around the same goal and the same spirit in making a film. And especially when you deal with stars, it's not always easy. They have their egos, and and they need them probably to be in front of a camera and to be where they got. They became stars because they had a big ego, and maybe, of course, once they are a star, the ego gets even better, bigger. So it's good if, as a director, you leave your ego at home when you go to the set. So that would be one less problem on the set. And I came to understand, in my opinion, it is not at all that your crew and everybody is there to serve the director, but it's quite the opposite. The director is there in order to help everybody else to do his job. You know, one has to light the scenes and to put out the cameras, another has to take the sound, and of course if you stage the scene in such a way that he can never get his mic anywhere without a shadow. And so you get to rethink the scene so that he can do his job. Mostly, of course, you're there to help the actors doing their job. I came to have a lot of, over the years, a lot of respect for actors, because you make yourself incredibly vulnerable if you put yourself up in front of a camera 9 in the morning, and you're supposed to do the opposite of what we all do in real life, where we try to hide our feelings to get through life and come along. Well, they are there, and they are supposed to show their innermost feelings right there in front of a camera. That takes a lot of confidence, not only in yourself and in your feelings and in your emotions and in the quality of your face, but also it takes a lot of trust to the people who are there while you're doing it. And most of all, of course, the director and this machine, the camera. So to help them to do that, the first thing is to help them understand that the camera is not an enemy, but is their friend. The way of understanding this is, in the first works, I was almost trying to hide the camera behind the camera, but we didn't have any video displays, or so I still don't use it to this day. But I thought it must be, the actor will be embarrassed if he sees me watching him. So I tried to hide behind the camera. And as a result, I felt the actors don't trust me quite, and they'd rather look what is the cameraman doing, what is his reaction, until I came to understand you're not embarrassing the actor by watching him, quite the opposite. You are his audience. When he is on stage, he can control by the reactions of the audience, or so, or he thinks he can control. He's getting a feedback from the audience, and this feedback gives him the energy to go on and also to feel whether they get him or whether he is, performing against the void and nothing comes back. So the closer you are to him and to the group of actors in front of the camera, the better it is for him. So your first work as a director is just to watch and to listen, be an audience, be receptive. After the shot, in my opinion, don't tell him, you know, a little more to the left or a little louder or a little faster. No, you got to tell him something that proves that you did pay attention indeed. You say, look, at that and that moment, I think, you know, when you say that line, don't look at her. It may be more interesting, you know, you say the line into the void, you're aware of how she may react, of what you are telling her, in the character. And so you don't look at her while you say your line, you look a little down. And only after it's over you turn around to check her reaction. So you give him these kind of indications, and I, for good reasons, I'll tell you, I don't go much into psychology anymore. At least now the actor knows that you have been watching him, and you have been listening, and he said, and you tell him, I like very much the way you dropped, you know, on the last line, and don't raise your voice, but you know it almost becomes a murmur. Now he knows there is somebody there who is really watching him. Otherwise, what might happen, and I had this from an actor once, is he told me, the French actor, that was actually in this movie in Lebanon. Yeah, you know, I don't care so much for what directors are telling me. Early on in the shooting, I watch the crew, and I pick one of the guys in the crew. He doesn't know about it in this movie in Lebanon. Actually, happened to be the focus puller. And after each shot, you know, when you go cut or so, he's the first one I look at to see whether he did pay attention or whether he's just writing down his measurements and so. He is for me like a gauge where I can measure the temperature, you know, whether I managed to get his attention or not. And that throughout the film, and after 8 weeks, he still doesn't know that he was my audience throughout the film, the one I'm always watching. Now, most actresses, for other reasons, don't watch the director. They watch the cinematographer, or actually the one who's handling the camera. And most cases in Europe, it's the one and the same person who is lighting and operating the camera. And so the actresses watch when he comes up from behind the camera, because then from the expression of his face, she can tell whether she got across to him or not. Anyhow, he is the one who sees her most clearly, because he sees her through the lens. And good cinematographers are also very emotional people. And indeed, you could tell from their reactions. It's even helpful to me to see and to say, well, did you think this was the best take, or rather the previous one? Doesn't have to answer. You can tell from his face. And as cinematographers are also in charge of the lighting, and therefore of the way the actors will look, it's invariably cinematographers who have affairs with the leading lady, not directors, for good reasons, except for some, like Ingmar Bergman. Now, he has, I learned that from his cinematographer, Sven Nykvist, or Nyquist, as people say. He did this One in Love movie and two others with me in Germany before that. I asked him, Sven, well, how Ingmar Bergman, in my eyes, is the one who's getting the most truthful performances out of actors. How does he do it? He said, well, funny you asked me that question, because I wonder too. What do you mean? What? He never works with them. I said, what do you mean? Well, you know, he comes to the set. Of course, they had rehearsals before, just, you know, like theater rehearsals to know roughly the blocking and to be sure that they know their lines. But then he comes on the set, and I talk with him, you know, how we're going to set up the scene, and so I can prep my lighting. And then he goes to the makeup room and, you know, goes to see, say, Liv Ullmann, and she has a very difficult scene that day, so he goes in and says, so Liv, how are you today? What did you do last night? Oh, I went out for dinner. Whom with? What did you talk about? Interesting. And what did you say? Oh, very nice. And how is your mother? Fine. When is she coming to visit? And so on. He's just relaxing her. He wouldn't talk about the scene they're about to shoot. Not foolish as I once went to see Jeremy Irons in this One in Love film, and it's one of the last scenes in the novel and in the movie where he says this, you know, famous line, think about that I spent all of my fortune and years of my life for a woman who wasn't really my type. And so I go and see Jeremy. So today we have this most famous line of Proust, and he goes, "Oh my God, how do you want me to say it now?" Well, Bergman was cleverer than me. He's just doing some small talk, and then the assistant comes and says, "We're ready," and he takes Liv to the set, still chatting. Oh, you didn't tell me what you had for dessert. And then he sits her there, and then it goes sound, camera, roll, and then he said, hold it a minute, and he comes back from behind the camera and goes near Liv and touches her. Okay. Good, now we can go. And then roll it, action. He's been relaxing her. She made her comfortable. He gave her the feeling that he is there only for her, that friendly eyes are looking upon her. And then her face, you know, is not contracted. She's not camera conscious. She's not wondering how she looks or how she's going to read this line. She can simply let herself go in the situation. Sven also said that these actresses by Bergman, they not only were not afraid of the camera, they were addicted to the camera. The camera had to be closer and closer. It was almost like they made love with the camera. So to have a close-up, they did not use a long lens and then shoot her from afar. No, the camera right in front of her face, you know, even while whatever orgasm she is experiencing or so. So she would play with the camera, and you could consider the camera almost like a hairdryer who is, you know, kind of blowing warm winds towards you, you know. And the closer the camera moves on the tracking shot, and so the more comfortable you feel, because like she's there and she's watching you, and the camera is, and it's the medium. This is what gives you excitement and everything, and. I think that is the result of, besides, of course, the knowledge he had of his actors, the familiarity, because all year long they were working in theater in Stockholm and only in the summer vacation, and they set out to make a movie, so they all knew each other and had this relationship. Trust is the basis of work with actors. And well, if you don't have the privilege as he had to live all year long, almost like with an ensemble with his actors, well, you have the possibility to know them better by setting up rehearsal periods before the actual shooting starts. So all questions can be brought up during the rehearsal. You should never discard anything an actor wants to say or bring in. He should always feel that any suggestion is welcome, as unimportant it may be. It's you never know. There might be an idea in it. But basically, you start this this relation of trusting each other with it. Also, if you make a mistake, which you often do as a director, well, you don't have to apologize, you just admit it. So they understand not only them are vulnerable, you are vulnerable, and mostly you are very fallible. I think this is again what I say. You're there to help others to make your movie, which should be everybody's movie. It should be the crew's movie. I hate these gurus who set them up as directors, and everybody has to help the genius to ultimately give birth to his baby. Horrible idea. A movie is not a baby. It's a result of a lot of work and technique and people involving technology as much as emotions. It's no use to talk about motivation to actors, not even during the rehearsing period, because you can't perform emotions no more than you can say, well, I would like to make a movie to explain now whatever deeper meaning you may have in mind, and why this is going to be an important movie, because for the first time it will deal with whatever underlying of fascism or whatnot. No, motivations is nothing an actor can perform. You can appeal to some emotional experience he had. You can ask him to come up, whether he's ever been in a similar situation. You can guide him towards that. But psychological explanations and motivations will just embarrass once he's in front of the camera and has to do his lines. How can he think about motivations? He should feel them, but not in an abstract way. In a sense, I got along better with non-professional actors at the beginning of my career. I was kind of afraid to talk to actors, feeling that I wouldn't know exactly how to tell them. So you work with non-professionals, which is a very rewarding experience, because they have a hard time to say the line in the right way. They are not experienced in learning lines in the first place, then to give them as if they were natural. But if ultimately you're there, where you have the feeling this has been an authentic expression of this feeling, of this reading of this line, of dealing with this situation. But that's the limit. You're happy you got them once there, print, okay, and you move on to the next scene. You can never, that after a while I found out, you can never go beyond that. Now with a professional actor, of course, he would in the beginning very easily give you many ways of doing the scene. He is a virtuoso, that's what he's paid for, that's what he thinks he knows best. And beware of the actor who comes to ask you, how should I do this scene? Should I do it this way and that way? And he has many tricks up his sleeve how he can do the scene, and you know damn well, none of these will qualify, because these are all tricks, you know, these are all things he did before, he worked out before. This type of actor will need a lot of rehearsals to overcome all the ways he knows, who think he knows how to do the scene, until he finally, you know, has to come upon a new and different way of doing it. Now, on the other hand, you may have opposite him a partner, an actor, or an actress who is extremely spontaneous and struggles to find it the right way, but then on the second or third time she got it. Everybody feels it on the set. You have this moment, you get goosebumps. Oh, this was so right, you know. You could not help listening and being fascinated. But then there will never ever again be such a take. It only happens once. Now, of course, it should not happen during the rehearsal, because what you will get is just warmed up of this experience, and the repeat, the warmed up emotion is not good enough for the camera. The camera is a magical machine. It's like an X-ray. Immediately perceives everything that's fabricated and falsified, and amplifies the fabrication, but is also extremely sensitive to when something authentic happens in front of the camera. It is caught. So now you get these two actors. The one, you know, you have to work to death, you know, before at the 25th take, maybe, you know, at the verge of breaking down, he will finally get a truthful expression, and his partner will only do it on the third time. So that is the kind of thing you can find out when working during their rehearsal, which type this actor might be and which type that one be. And you don't have to start with what is called the master shot, where you just shoot the scene in a wide shot and everybody is burning its energy. No, you start with the close-up of the one who is most spontaneous and finds it at an early stage, and you keep the other one off screen or in the reverse shot, and so you just to tire him before he ever even gets to the close-up. Even a very experienced actor like Dustin Hoffman, I found out this to be true, because of course him being the star, you know, I started with his close-ups, and say Malkovich is off screen, just feeding the lines, as it's called, from beside the camera. And then is reverse, and we do it on Malkovich, and Dustin is just standing next to the camera and feeding him the lines, and I stop it in the middle of a take, and I say, Dustin, could you just read this line again, the way you just did? Yeah, why? He does it. I say, do it again, listen to it. Does it again. I say, don't you feel this is a very good reading? Yeah. Well, when you were in front of the camera, it felt forced. You were not at ease. Let's turn the camera around. John, you come over here. Dustin, you sit back there. Do it now in front of the camera the way you did it when you were just feeding the lines from the side. And it worked. It made a huge difference. Some actors are such control freaks as far as how they will come across to the audience, that they are always somehow, when they are in front of the camera and they feel now is the moment that counts, well, they are not that good. They have too many things on their minds. Once their shot is done and they are off screen, all of a sudden they start to be relaxed, they are sovereign, they are in control, they feel good, and they do it in a natural and far more convincing way. Well, this is the way you got to get them when they are in front of the camera, and they do. If you do it, they do appreciate. Another thing, how vulnerable actors can be, even though they seem such strong bastards as, say, Robert Duvall, like the smell of napalm in the morning, in Apocalypse Now. So we're doing the Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood novel, kind of futuristic against the patriarchal society in general and behavior of men in particular. He is doing this patriarch, and every morning when I come to say hello, which is another good habit to him in his trailer, just to see how are you doing, everything is fine, and so yeah, fine, ready for another day of bullshit. I said, what do you mean, Robert? What this feminist stuff we're doing here? I said, why are we doing it then? Why did you take the part? Why? I love this character. I said, why? It's my father. I know exactly what he's doing. He used to be in the military, and that's exactly, the way he behaved at home and how he would do. So it's a pleasure for me to do this work. As for all the things around it, all these women and this feminist stuff, I don't care. Opposite him is Natasha Richardson, may she rest in peace, and it's one of her first movies. She's very scared, and she's very much into the cause of Margaret Atwood and of the story we're telling. And we all stay in the same hotel, and one day she comes in the morning to me and she says, I can't work. I asked her what happened. Well, I didn't know, but somehow my room must be just below Robert Duvall's room, and somehow in the bathroom, because of the tubes and stuff and the water installation, you can hear every word, and I overheard a phone conversation he must have had while he was on the loo, who was saying, oh yeah, this Natasha thinks she's her mother, she's just, a stick, she is no woman, this movie won't work, And now, poor Natasha, how could she, work next morning with him in a kind of a pseudo-love scene? I said, well, it's just a pseudo-love scene. You're supposed to hate him. Use it. And she said, well, I know these tricks about actors. Use it. I can't use it. I hate him so much. I can't even play hating him. Well, somehow she managed anyhow. But she was not she lost somehow, she was not radiant anymore from that day on. And I can see it on film. With him and his macho attitude was even confirmed by this. Now, how much of a macho he is, just to tell you, Robert Duvall is very fond of tango dancing. At least that's about 20 years ago or even more. And so he, part of his contract was that there had to be a dance floor for him to practice, and since there was none in Durham, North Carolina, where we were shooting, in the corridor of the hotel, they had let out, a long wooden stretch where he was practicing with a tango dancer who was part of the team just to be practicing with him. He brought her in as such, as others may bring whatever, a dialogue coach or so. And of course, it was obvious that they were living together too. And one morning again, I come to salute him, and in his trailer, there is another similar tango dancer. So as we walked to the set, I said, "Oh, by the way, Bob, who is she? What happened to Linda?" "Oh, well, Linda had to go back to. She has a small little engagement in L.A." So I said, "Who is she?" "She's the B team." Now, the B team apparently had exhausted him so much that on that day he was just not so very good. I could feel it during the shooting, and when I saw the dailies a day later, I could see it on screen. He just looked a bit tired and didn't have the energy, didn't exude the energy he used to have. So I tell him that next morning on setting up the scene where he had to do a priest's sermon, and I say, "Yeah, well, the dailies are okay, but I wouldn't mind to reshoot this one scene." Got very suspicious immediately. Why? I said, "Well, it was maybe just a little low in energy." And he blew his fuse right then and there, yelling at the top of his lungs, "I'll give you energy to shoot you all the way back to Germany where you belong, enough of this bullshit here in intellectual filmmaking." And he goes on, a tantrum. You could hear a pin drop, of course, everybody was scared shitless, so was I. Knees trembling, after all, he's Robert Duvall. And we are on the set. And so when it was over, I thought, okay, maybe I go to the airport and quit or shout back. No, I didn't feel like it. So I had the good idea to turn to the assistant director and to ask him, Tom Gallagher, "Are we ready?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, roll him." Duvall went to the pulpit and delivered his speech with a lot of energy, very convincing, and the incident was never mentioned again. Next morning, when I came, to his place and said, "We talk about what happened yesterday." He said, What do you mean?" And I realized he forgot about it entirely. I caught him at a bad moment. Maybe he had been exhausted by the B team, and we never mentioned it again. And but there had been something, which I heard by even suggesting that he might have had a lack of energy. He believes in his energy, and that's why he's good. In the last scene of the movie, Natasha Richardson finally comes in. There's a revolt against the patriarchs, and she's to slash his throat with a razor blade. Now that's the kind of shot, very complicated to set up. There have to be blood tubes coming up. There is a prosthetic here, and then when the moment she slashes, the special effect man has to pump the blood so it comes out. And then he has to fall over, and the camera follows him, and he's lying on the ground, and a pool of blood, coming, pumping out of these prosthetic veins and whatnot. And the first take, it's the slashing of the knife and the pouring of the blood were totally out of sync. I mean, the blood came out before while the knife was still up in the air. The second take, the prosthetic came off because it was hot and sweating and the glue didn't hold, and so on and so on. And finally the tube broke, and until we got a good shot, and we keep it running, and he is there, and you know, it was opening his eyes, he stopped breathing, and everything is good. Very relieved, I said, cut, and said, Bob, I think we got it. And he, you know, he comes up slowly and he says, you bet. I say, well, all the effects, everything worked. Was there anything special for you about this take? He says, absolutely. You know, as I hit the ground, as I hit the floor, I saw this tree next to a rock behind my farm in Virginia. And I knew this is the last thing I will see when I go. I mean, we're working about, you know, blood pumps and stuff. The guy is actually dying. He's experiencing his own death. You got to forgive everything. You know, give him 10 tantrums, insult everybody. You know, if this kind of feeling comes up, or hard-boiled Sam Shepard in the movie we're going to see there, where he plays an engineer who pretends he can control everything, and there's only rationality in the world, and you can calculate in probabilities and whatnot. We shoot a scene in Paris, and on the boat from America to Paris, he met this young girl. He doesn't know that it's his daughter. He feels very attracted to her. She feels very attracted to him. Both not knowing why they feel so attracted. But nothing else happens but a slow dance, and not by chance, but because, so when the boat reaches the French Le Havre, they say goodbye and probably never meet again. And when he is in Paris attending his conference of United Nations or whatnot, where he's an engineer for developing countries, building dams and stuff, and providing energy, he remembers that she said when in Paris the first thing she wanted to do is to visit the Louvre. Now this engineer of course has no relationship to art or whatsoever, but he goes and buys a ticket and goes to the Louvre looking for her. And she but he has to look at all these paintings and all this art and doesn't quite understand what it all is. She spots him and hides behind the statue, and he leaves the garden. The Louvre, goes out into the garden, sits behind on a bench, and all of a sudden she appears, and he invites her for lunch. And after lunch, they say, okay, this has been very nice to see you again. Well, it seems like fate, and so, but now you have to go on to hitchhiking to Rome and Athens to find your mother, and I'll go on with my conference. If you got there, drop me a card. And he leaves the restaurant. She said, you mind, I'm sitting here and finishing my coffee. Sure not. He leaves. We see him walking outside the window of the restaurant. She sips her coffee. I shout, cut. And say, we'll do one more take. And who doesn't come back is Sam Shepard. I send out the assistant. He calls me, said, you better come. I go outside around the street corner. There is Sam Shepard leaning against the wall, very shaken, like almost sobbing. And I walk over and say, Sam, what's happening? Are you all right? And he says, I just realized I could not tolerate another loss in my life. again, you know, this is what actors give you. It's, in a way, it's not even on screen. He must have felt that when he was walking away in front of the window outside the coffee shop. This was not even a close-up, but this is what he went through. And I could give you many examples like this, and so this is the fascinating thing in filmmaking. And other than that, he was a total asshole and a jerk and terrible to work with. But you know, you got to take it as you know. Other people may be much easier to work with, but there is less going on within them, and therefore there is less on the screen afterwards. So when it is said that some people are difficult and you better don't work with them because they are difficult, I found out those are the most rewarding ones to work with. Well, there's a reason why they're called difficult. They are demanding. They are not easy to handle. They are not always in control of their lives, but there is that is the substance emotions are made of, and films are made of these emotional moments. What you want to see on screen is well, when I said a good novel, according to Henry James, is life lived, rendered in words, and a good movie is one that contains a few moments of authentic life. All of a sudden, life which is so hard to get hold of and to put into art. And if you have a few such truthful moments, which you have to catch, you cannot fabricate them. You are out there like a hunter. You try to trick the actors, the situation, everything in such a way that you may catch this one rare moment on film. And when you have it, you know, you can be lucky. So therefore, there is so-called difficult actors and so on. Now, difficult is not people with a big ego who are looking for publicity. No, difficult are the ones who who don't just give you what's written in the script, you know, deliver their lines and fake the emotions to go with it. Difficult are the ones, you know, who have a hard time to get there, but once they get there, it's truthful. And that, by the way, is pretty much, to come back to this morning, what I find out about my, you know, so-called ironical quest for identity. I'm not sure what an identity is good for and why one should have one in the first place. Anyhow, identity is not character. Character, one, everybody has a character. One is choleric, another melancholic, another sentimental, sad, dynamic, whatever. That's not an identity. Personality, neither. That's personality could be open or closed, emotional, funny, serious, pompous, whatever. So if identity is that what remains after idem est, you know, if that was remains after everything you had done, well, it's this feeling that after all these changes you have, you are still somehow the same person. I mean, certainly you've changed and you did very, very different things and you've been like a chameleon, but still something within you tells you you're either finally you are there, or you are there again, you found it again, whatever the it is. So it's something you felt like when you were a child, and so I think it's very much like about these authentic moments on film. It's just like a breathing. It's something that is there by nature, which brings us to the radio neurologists in the next step, because where would the identity be located in the brain, if there is such a thing? That is a talk I'd like to have soon. So I think identity is just being there, and is just to be alive. Now my habit is to always stop a little earlier to give you opportunity for some Q&A about what we've been talking about today, but also I do have dessert for you, audio visual dessert. Dessert? Okay. Clip of... but I don't want to cut short the question. I hate questions, but don't be afraid. Just try to open this. This is the conversation I had with Billy Wilder about the foreground and the background and the simple story about the simple background. I taped many hours of conversations with him, and now if you think I've been entertaining, well, you did not see Billy Wilder yet, or hear. So I'll just give you, and I think it's the best lecture on filmmaking, art, and behavior I know of. Yeah, so I just go on, and finish this brief survey of my identity question. But I'm well aware, as Nicholas Ray, Rebel Without a Cause, once told me, there's nothing wrong with experience, but you can't share it. You can't transmit experience. So I share, you're welcome, but it won't, I don't know. That is actually, I think, a big philosophical question. If we could actually transmit experience, let's just say about the last 3,000 years, all the experiences had been actually transmitted, maybe even in a more or less genetic way, well, life would be very boring. You'd know everything. And the good thing is we always start from scratch. And what you have learned on paper is one thing. What you have learned by somebody telling you is already a little better, because it's almost an experience to observe someone and to share. It's more than on paper. But actually the only thing is to experience it in situation. Anyhow, I jump forward from this very first coming back to Germany and doing this first film, finding myself in this group, and which for about 10 years, it was this period of 15 years of New German Cinema, as it was labeled. I was at some point attempted to do an early Brecht play as theater, Wahl, his very first play. I was looking for an actor. I heard of a weird guy who was doing theater in a cellar somewhere in a basement. Werner Fassbinder. I went to see him. He was 21, and that was before his first movie, so he was actually the actor in Bâle. And so for a time, our path ran in parallel. I met Margarete von Trotta as an actress on this film, and she later went on to become a filmmaker of her own. As a result, we divorced. No, that's not the reason. Maybe, you never know in a divorce. But there was like, what was interesting was in one place, in Munich, there was this group of 10, 15 filmmakers making very similar type of movies, or at least trying to express their reality in their movies in a very personal way, very much as 10 years earlier the French New Wave, Godard, Chabrol, Malle, and so on, where I had partaken already, worked. And it was also, of course, soon the 68, the political period, which was actually preceded, I think that the real political change was not so much caused by the students in 68 and Danny Cohn-Bendit and Dutschke and the universities. The real cultural revolution happened in the very early 60s through the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and Bob Dylan and Donovan and others. That was the real break with the previous culture, and the student thing kind of came in an intellectual way upon that later, but the society had already broken with the past, just in the way of dressing, in the long hairs, the Beatle hair, the music, and so on. Anyhow, we became even more politisé, anyhow, engaged in different ways, some more, some less, and we had known a lot of these students, also personally, who then turned into went underground and became these violent groups. The Bader Meinhof, especially Margarete and I, we had worked in a network where those who were arrested in the prisons and isolated, we went to visit them. So you get more and more into that, and as a without ever believing in the in the violence, in the stupid violence of their terrorist acts, and nevertheless, when there were such things that a judge was being shot at and this and that, well, there was a today, for me, not quite understandable approvement of such acts. You would never have committed them, but somehow you said the people were doing it. Maybe they was, what is a judge's death against the thousands of years he's put people behind bars and whatnot. These kind of sophistic things that would deserve a longer lesson. But there was a say that in the revolt, which was first directed against, as they said, against objects, the media, the press empires, the monopoly of certain newspapers, and then turned towards people. But what the worst was, ultimately they turned it against themselves and killed themselves. Any person with a respect for human values would say that cannot be the right way. If idealism leads ultimately to murdering and finally suicide, there's something must be wrong. The most militant film, Billy Wilder once told me, you know, there's nothing wrong with political convictions, and so the only danger is you may lose the audience. Actually, we won the audience by this film with a short clip you saw, Katarina Blum, based on a pamphlet of Heinrich Böll in Weider, who had been a soldier in the Second War, who was really a pacifist at heart, and who, at the height of the student movement and of the Baader-Meinhof and of the first violence that came on, had invited these terrorists, a group of 8 people by then, to dialogue. In an article he wrote, how can 80 million people be scared of 8 people? Let's give them kind of a safeguard instead of arresting them and try to open a dialogue with them. There was a general outcry in the monopolistic press and media at the time, and one summing it up by saying that people like Heinrich Böll were just as responsible as the terrorists because they were the spiritual fathers of violence, and that he especially was the spiritual father of violence. He tried to, through legal means, appealing to courts and so on, to have this label be taken from him. He lost, and as a result he wrote a short pamphlet called The Lost Honor of Katarina Blum, which was of course the lost honor of Heinrich Böll, showing this, say, she's in catering, she's how you'd say, she's a server who actually did give shelter for a night to a terrorist, and helping him after that night to escape, not really knowing who he was or what he has done, anyhow, not asking. She felt somebody was on the run, so she gave him shelter, and then she was labeled herself a terrorist and accused, and there we had this interview with the police, where she's trying to explain how come there's so many kilometers in the mileage of her car. And this movie was very popular, so it showed that, well, is everybody sympathizing with the terrorists? Not quite possible, but anyhow, that was our next label. We were sympathizers with the terrorists, with the whatever, leftists and so. It all came to a sudden halt when these main terrorists had been arrested and put into a special prison with a special trial and so on. Finally killed themselves, and it was questioned how could they have guns in their cells with such high surveillance, especially built prison, you know, in such an efficient state as West Germany, and so on. And this whole group of filmmakers came together for one last time to do a movie together, where everybody contributed 10 or 15 minutes, and some we worked together in the editing, called Germany in Autumn. So that was somehow also the end of the, not only of the political movement, which imploded around late 70s, 1980 it was really over with, and And also it was, maybe because by now we were 40 years old, the falling apart of this group. So there are some friendships left, such as between Herzog, Wenders, and myself today, but basically it's not a movement anymore. We just have a kind of veterans friendship, you might call it. And I felt what did I feel? No, I take this back. I didn't feel anything, no, but I made a beautiful experience. Working with Heinrich Böll, the novelist, on this, first on this movie, Last Honor of Katarina Blum, and then also including him on this collective Germany in Autumn, which was half a documentary and half with little fiction scenes. I found how rewarding it was to actually work with a writer. So far I had adapted literature to screen, the writers who had passed away years ago, decades ago, but I had never actually worked with a living writer, and I found out it was much easier to get along with the living than with the dead. I mean, I had failed with some of the dead, like Kleist. I had tried early on, much too early, to adapt one of his novellas, or Proust, and here all of a sudden with Heinrich Böll, I was very much at ease because, well, why? Because it was not only the novel, there was also the person. It's not that I questioned the person, why did you write this novel? No, but just being with this person and debating with him about, well, whatever was in the newspaper, daily news, and this and that. I got, maybe I'm a lazy reader, I got a better understanding, first of the person who had written the novel, and therefore at some point of what the novel was all about. I think we will come back to that in the days to come, because this is really the question of what he called, Schirmacher, your professor, calls cinema and literature, or literary cinema, or whatever. That is what I first experienced when really working with Heinrich Böll. And it encouraged me, and through him I met a colleague of his who was very famous and intimidating writer Gunter Grass in Germany, and his Tin Drum, which was kind of the big piece of German literature of the post-war period, and which I never thought could make a movie. However, the producer who had done my first film, Jan Turles, had bought the rights to it, and he came back to me, and so I read it and I reread it, and I still did not understand how this might ever make a movie. It was, as I tried to sum up, as you saw the trailer, this is set first of all in the city of Danzig, which now is called Gdansk, and belongs to Poland, had been German, then had been Swedish, then had been Polish. Nobody exactly knows the geography, somewhere on the Baltic. And then you have the story of this boy, which I thought was all, pure product of fantasy, and I didn't dare to touch it. I must say that just before doing the Tin Drum and after the Böll's Last Honor of Katarina Blum, I had ventured myself to adapt a French novel by Margaret Yourcenar, the one where you saw the silent movie actress singing a song with all her white makeup, incredible expressive gestures and voice, and as of another time, called Coup de Grace. And I had befriended somehow Billy Wilder, the great Austrian director who had immigrated, who was, as he said, had to leave and went to exile when the Nazis came to power via Paris to Hollywood. And, anyhow, is this most wonderful character whom I will devote an entire lecture to one of these days. So I had shown this Coup de Grace movie. Coup de Grace is how we say in French. It's called Coup de Grace in English. I showed it to him, as I often did when I had a picture finished, also the people you like to debate with is not the critics, it's not the audience, it's your colleagues and friends. So after the screening, he took me to lunch, and he said, it's an amazing picture, and yet it doesn't quite work. You know, one is taken for a moment, and then you fall flat, and then you're taken again, and then you stopped again. So let's try to understand why it doesn't work. You know, we look at pictures as a Swiss clockmaker would look at a watch and say, well, you know, why is it late? You know, let's take it apart and see what doesn't work with the picture. So it's set in 1919. They are at war. I thought the first war is over in 1918, isn't it? 1418. Oh yeah, because this is not the First World War. This is the war in east of Poland, between Poland and Russia, called the Baltic States. Now that's not the Balkans, the Baltic States. We are having this conversation on Rodeo Drive in California, so that's all very far away. So it's a very complicated geography. And then the time, okay, so that is the Bolsheviks fighting the Polish and the white Russian officers who are, and the German officers who just lost the First World War, go there to fight the Bolsheviks. Historically and geographically, it's a very complicated background. Now, let's see, what is your story in the foreground? Here is a young lady, Margarete von Trotta, living in a castle. Her brother comes back. They are in between the lines of the Bolsheviks and the White Russians and the Polish. The castle was taken sometimes by the sons and the others, so they have to. She has leanings towards the Bolsheviks, but yet she is an aristocrat. So her brother comes back, bringing a friend to help her defend the castle, and she falls in love with this friend officer of her brother's until the day, and she can't understand how he is resisting her advances. And until the day she finds out that in fact he is her brother's lover. Outraged and feeling humiliated by this gender treason as much as incestuous treason, she joins the Bolsheviks, is made prisoner by her lover, or the man who is her brother's lover. And as they don't make prisoners, they all get shot, and as a last favor, she asks that this man whom she loves, who loves her brother, shoots her. That's the coup de grace, the final shot. So, having summed it up in this way, Billy Wilder says, you've got a very complicated story in the foreground. Now, maybe that's what's wrong with your movie. You know, you've got this complicated story in the foreground, and you tell it against a very complicated background historically and geographically. Either better you take a simple story against a complicated background, or a complicated story but against a simple background. The best being, of course, you take a simple story against a simple background. That's what he did. So here I am with just coming out, and the picture was a flop. Very much praised by the French critics above all, but considered it my best, but a total flop everywhere. So here I'm with this knowledge, wisdom by Billy Wilder. I'm with the Tin Drum, Baltic State, Gdansk on the Baltic Sea, not quite German, not quite Polish, Kashubian, what's that? Little boy who doesn't want to grow, nevertheless he grows. He has two fathers, at least he pretends. It may be the Polish Kashubian guy who is his mother's lover, or it may be his mother's husband, the German, who may be his father. He is indistinct anyhow. He works on killing him. Terribly complicated story against a terribly complicated background. I was very long to get convinced. And what convinced me was simply a lunch with the novelist Gunter Grass, who said, look, let's not be so theoretical. Why don't you go to Gdansk, pay a visit to the city? I have a friend there who can show you around. Which he did, and I'll tell you more tomorrow how it all happened. Pictures at hand, but mostly it was that I discovered that this story, which seemed to me like a fairy tale of a somewhat exuberant brain, a fantasy story, was just lived for him. Everything was real for him, the experience was real. The only little trick he did is that this boy didn't grow up and stayed forever a dwarf, but wasn't actually a dwarf, but was just a boy who didn't want to join the grown-ups. So from that I took the courage and to come back and say, well, if he could write this novel, which seems so bigger than life, starting from this small lived experience of his, then maybe I can go through the same way, making a movie of it. And so that became my most successful movie, the kind of a new label I all of a sudden had, which was now whatever, the Oscar-winning director of the Tin Drum, blah, blah, blah. And as a result, of course, I got offers from Hollywood, which I turned down, thinking, no, now I've made it, now I have this identity, now I'm a grown-up filmmaker, now I'm even a commercial value, I'm bankable. So I'll use that to make the movie I would like to do, which was about a journalist in the war in Lebanon. Clips you've just seen, which I actually shot in Lebanon, and it was a total flop, and so I got rid once more of a label. All of a sudden I was not really the bankable director anymore, and tried it in Paris with the Proust, which was again a flop, because all of a sudden me, who had been such a well-assimilated little German student in France, all of a sudden was treated as a barbarian who dares to touch Proust, our holy cow. It felt like a second invasion of France by the Huns. The film was shunned. It was actually quite successful in the USA. We didn't go through that. And no, I did not want to go back to Germany. I had burned ground in France. So now, too late, because the success of the Tin Drum was almost forgotten, I went to New York and got an invitation to have a coffee with Dustin Hoffman on Columbus Avenue, and I know that he was considering doing the Tin Drum and to film it, and so I had read the play and spoke with him about it, and he said, but you absolutely must meet Arthur Miller. I said, no, but I just spoke about it. I don't want to touch a piece of Americana. I learned enough, you got to stay within your own culture. It didn't even succeed to me to try to deal with French culture, even though I really knew it inside out. Well, anyhow, I think you should meet Mr. Miller anyhow. And by the way, congratulations for Mephisto. I say Mephisto, that's my friend Istvan Chabo who did that and got an Academy Award. Oh, I was seeing you because I thought you did Mephisto. What did you do? I said, well, I did a thing called the Tin Drum. Oh, I said, I heard about it, didn't see it. I'll watch it. Congratulations anyhow. I had lunch with Arthur Miller, and we discussed about how to make a film out of the death of a salesman. And I said, well, why are you even considering it? The movie was done in the 50s by Laszlo Benedek with Frederick March in the main part. And he said, well, that's just the reason why I would like to have it done again, because they totally falsified the play. The play is Willy Loman, salesman from Brooklyn, who loses his mind slowly by slowly because his idea of the American dream falls apart. The reality is different from the dream and the values he's been living by, to sum it up in a short way. Now, this was inadmissible for Hollywood, of course, in the 50s. Nothing could be wrong with the American dream, so it had to be wrong with Willy Loman, who was a lunatic in the first place. So they portrayed him through Frederick March as a psychopath. So nothing wrong with the society around, all wrong with him and his mind and his attitude. And he said, and I don't, Mr. Miller said, I don't want to leave it at that. I think I appreciate, but and he said, and by the way, they cut out the most essential lines and parts of the play in order to accommodate this truncated version, this falsified version. And he said, I would like to have all the play. I say, yes, but the play is a play. So that if you shoot this as a movie, it will feel very talkative, not to say theatrical. In the play, they say, no, there's too many people, no, there's too many buildings, they've been putting up all these high-rises about, don't you see, look out the window, he's describing all the high-rises, the porch, and do you remember the trees that were to be there? Now he goes into another 12 lines about the trees that used to be there, and how the boys used to play out there, and say, I say, but Mr. Miller, in a movie you just show the high rises, and you could cut out this whole speech, and if you want to show the trees and how they played baseball underneath, well, you just cut to a flashback and to show them playing it. So you cannot talk, on stage through words. You try to build up a whole world. But basically, it's just out of the words that, in the imagination of the spectator, the world is created. On film, most things you show, and then you just leave the conflict, in the foreground. So I think it's if you want to keep all the words, we cannot go out and shoot it in Brooklyn. It would feel redundant. And I say, but I think we can make a very fine screenplay, and cutting out a lot of the talk, and keep the talk for the essential, for the conflict among the characters. And he says, no, but I don't want that. For me, the words are important. So I said, right, then we should do it as a play. And he says, you mean, put it up on stage and then bring in 5 cameras and film it? I said, no, this never works. You see the actors during a performance, sweating, the cameras are in the right position. And in the best of cases, when you see the transcript or the recording of a play in such way, is that you regret that you didn't see the performance, which indeed, as it seems from the recording, must have been brilliant. Because if you properly want to share it and to see it, well, you cannot film it from the outside. Well, no, you have the family here, and you put the camera in the middle of the family, and you shoot him over there. Already on stage you can't do, because you would look into the alley, and then you shoot the father here, and then you shoot the mother who is coming in from the garden. That you couldn't do on stage, because that's where the audience is sitting. Then you cut back to the 2 boys, and so you cannot do it. And as we were talking, I said, well, there might be a way of doing it if we forget the theater. If we put up a theater set in the midst of a round horizon, so that we can work in the middle of it and do it in a movie studio. But still let them play it as a play, have a very abstract setting, even more abstract than they do on stage, like just the door and just this. You may have seen Dogville by Lars von Trier. Well, basically 15 years earlier or so, we did in this way the Salesman, but I wanted to have a wall here and a door, not just lines on the floor. And so this is how this came to happen. And I gave up very soon my resistance, because he was such a wonderful man to talk to, Mr. Miller, and then we found John Malkovich, who came in from Chicago, from the Steppenwolf Theater, to do a reading for Biff. And so, there were all the elements. It was irresistible for a director. And so I gave up my idea of working in a different culture. And Mr. Miller said, anyhow, there's a big European influence in this, this whole family life and all that. And started to talk about his family. And by the way, Willy Loman, I didn't want to give him a Jewish name, even though everybody knows this can only be a Jewish family. I wanted him to have another name. And I remembered I had seen a Fritz Lang movie, Dr. Mabuse. In the last scene, the Dr. Mabuse, the big criminal, goes crazy, and he's locked in a cell, and he's calling for the police, for the detective whom he wanted to confess to, and whose name was Lohman. So it goes, Lohman, Lohman, and he said, as I walked out of the theater, I had still this, in my mind, this Lohman, Lohman. And so that's why it's called Willy Loman, so you were well entitled to do the movie. And I settled in New York, and now, after all those years, became a little more of an American, and did a few more movies than there. In Louisiana, The Gathering of Old Men. Some of you have seen I adopted 2 kids down there in Louisiana. One of them is just divorcing. And grown up, so I'm very implicated there, and other things and so on. So all of a sudden, I thought, now I have found my true identity. I'm just another German immigrant in the United States, where everybody is welcome, and that is the moment when the wall came down a few years later. Just as we were going to preview the Handmaid's Tale in a shopping center in Boston, on the shuttle from New York to Boston, the pilot, instead of giving the outside temperature, came up with the news in Berlin the wall just came down. And so I thought, what am I doing in New York? And moved back to Berlin, and now I'm a new Berliner, last identity. Anyhow, we'll come back to many of these points in the course of the next days. I will focus on one or two films.